Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Participants in already.
All right, man.
Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, apologies for the ever so slight delay. We just had some
Yeah,
technical issues, but we're back at it.
yeah. Just gonna wait 2 more minutes for
Yeah,
people
perfect. Yeah.
to be joining.
Seeing a few familiar names already. Firstly, thank you for supporting the Apprentice Room by joining the August Apprenticeship series. It's nice to see that we're getting some returning attendees as well. Shows how dedicated you guys are towards hopefully getting your apprenticeship offers. And I can assure you guys on behalf of the Apprentice Room that so much more content is coming in terms of not just webinars, but also some really creative ideas. And right now we're at a really, really cool stage where we're just brainstorming and we're going to have a lot coming towards you guys very, very soon.
Looking forward to it, man. Looking forward to what's coming, especially once September hits and everyone's working and stuff. Got a lot of content loading for you guys. Okay, great. Just over a minute left. Just gonna let people join. In fact, it's already 05, so we'll probably get started just about now, since it's been a 5 minute grace period. Great. So, guys, again, thank you for joining, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final webinar. Just going to hand over to Sofian to do the intro.
Thank you very much, Joe Deborah. Thank you. So yeah, we're at the fourth and final session of the August Apprenticeship series. We've seen some unprecedented demand. We've seen a lot of questions, a lot of really engaging questions, thoughtful ones, and just a level of engagement that we didn't really anticipate. And it's so great to see that there's demand for what we're providing. We're providing high quality content and advice on apprenticeships. So we're gonna be starting the fourth session 4 out of 4. And we will be getting onto assessment centers, the absolute biggest part of any application process, and hopefully a stage that you guys will be able to experience on multiple occasions. You want to be getting into as many assessment centers as possible. And here we're going to help you not only get there with our previous sessions, but help you secure that offer because it's almost always the final stage. So without further ado, let's go on to the next slide where Joel will take over.
All right, great. All right, so what we'll cover in today's session, going to look at why first impressions count. After all, from when you walk into the door, that's when they're assessing you. Going to look at preparation tips, going to look at the assessments themselves, going to look at clear and confident communication, importance of commercial awareness, active listening, and building relationships.
Great, thank you very much. So why do first impressions count? Well, they matter because the funny thing about an assessment center is every single second of that day is a test. No matter what you do, the way you speak, the way you carry yourself, how you do your assessments, how you talk with the individuals around you, every single aspect of that day is an assessment. So it's incredibly important that you really master that first impression, being able to introduce yourself well and being able to hold that personality throughout the day. So simple things like punctuality, body language, and how you can even greet others can just set the tone the whole day. I think the best thing I'd probably emphasize in terms of first impressions is simply confidence. Simply being confident in your own body, in your own space is immensely important. And it just shows to not only the people you're going to be working with, but also the assessors that you're capable of working with others. It's a very quick way to gauge whether or not someone's capable of working in a workplace environment. So a strong first impression will often show professionalism and confidence, and it just makes it easier to reinforce that positive perception. Massive thing about applications and especially I'd say interviews is perception because they don't know you inside out. They may have seen your CV, they may know where you live, but they don't truly know you. That's something for your friends and family. So it's really important that you're providing the best perception possible. Perception is reality. So making sure that you're being perceived as confident, as outgoing, and being able to work in teams and being adaptable and sensible and responsible. I'm just throwing these buzzwords at you, but you get the gist. Make sure that your perception of yourself is as clean as possible. So thank you very much, and we can get on to the next slide.
All right, looking at the next section, the importance of commercial awareness. Now, after making your first impression, hopefully a positive first impression in assessment centers, usually you'll sit in a group task where commercial awareness will be tested in a variety of different ways. Normally in a group task, you might have a scenario where you have to look at a fictitious business problem or business scenario, normally very similar to that of the company itself. So looking at the importance of commercial awareness, which, as it says here, is understanding the company, the industry, and current trends. You want to brush up on that commercial awareness before you walk into that company. It's extremely important that you not only know what's going on with the company, but you know what's going on with the industry in question as well. Looking at things such as, basic things like inflation rate, interest rates, also looking at, what's going on in the industry with the bigger firms. For example, if we're talking about finance, what might, I don't know, if you're in a assessment center for an audit firm, what's going on with things like AI. A lot of the assessment centers nowadays have business problems on AI. A lot of the recent news has been incorporated into assessment centers to test that you actually know what you're doing. And as it says here, commercial awareness is about understanding the company's industry and the wider trends that impact its success. A way of showing that you're genuinely interested is through commercial awareness, not just understanding the role, not just understanding the company, but going just beyond that, showing that you're aware of what's going on in the world. Some recruiters might not expect you to have that level of commercial awareness, so it's also a very good way to shock them by surprise, especially when you start talking to them about the real world news. Not just only in group tasks, but in your final interviews. You might get tested on your commercial awareness. They might ask you to tell them about recent news that you may have been following recently about the industry. It's starting to become a standard question that's being asked. And I suspect that this year, that question will probably be thrown around quite a lot. And as it says here, having commercial awareness proves that you can bring informed ideas and adapt to change. So it's not just about, knowing the news and saying, oh yeah, I read that the other day, EY invested in more AI. But it's, being able to talk about your opinion on the news as well, bringing that real value. And, that to a recruiter already allows them to assess whether you're a good candidate, whether you'll actually provide value to the team. If we
Definitely.
move on to
And
this.
just a quick point that I'd like to emphasize with commercial awareness. It's
Yep.
one of the very few aspects of not only interviews, but also assessment centers that you can almost completely prepare beforehand. Whereas with an interview, you may be thrown off guard. With commercial awareness, you can do absolutely all of that on your own. You can take the initiative and research your industry and research your role completely by yourself. And another good aspect of it is not everyone really knows how important it is. Being able to show that knowledge in the industry you want to get into just sets yourself apart so much more than having a good interview question. Being able to put in these little pieces of information that you'd only really know if you are watching the news or following up regularly is a really good way to get yourself ahead. And often it's the little things in these assessment centers that will push you forward because the competition is so high. Absolutely everyone there is a smart, capable human being. Like I remember from all four of my assessment centers, there's no one there I looked at that I could confidently say, no, they shouldn't get the offer. Absolutely everyone was deserving. So often it's the little things like commercial awareness that will get you ahead of the line. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just say just another little key point that I did miss with commercial awareness. I guess some ways to think about developing commercial awareness, following even on LinkedIn, if you're active on LinkedIn, follow the Financial Times. They post regularly about news that's going on in finance, news that's going on with big finance firms, even following huge companies that you're interested in. Sometimes they might post news themselves. If you're on TikTok a lot, you can follow Bloomberg's news. They post a lot of news almost every single day. You could look at Bloomberg's. I think Bloomberg have a podcast on Spotify, and so do the Financial Times. So if you're into, podcasts as well, you can listen to the FT News. But even just going on YouTube and searching up videos, You never know, they could be posting up something new. It's just something that not a lot of candidates do to go above and beyond. If you move on to the next slide.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Active listening. This is something that I personally put in the slide because I feel like it's just so, so important to be able to be an active listener. Being able to speak is a skill that's relatively easy to master. It's simply you just putting words out there. But being able to listen is something that people tend to forget, and it's a bit more underrated because what it shows is that you're able to assimilate in a workplace environment. Being able to listen and really take in what your team members and other people are saying is a really important skill, and it can really differentiate you. And another thing that active listening is really good for in an assessment center is it shows that you're collaborative. Collaboration is absolutely massive in assessment centers. The whole purpose of the company getting these best applicants together in one environment is that they can see how you collaborate, because you're going to be collaborating on a daily basis, on an hourly basis at work. No matter what you want to do in life, you're going to have to collaborate, whether it be a creative industry or the most corporate job you could ever imagine. You're going to have to be collaborating. So active listening is a really good way to show that you're a collaborative individual. I've included a few ways you can show you're an active listener. So you can actually just focus on the person speaking. Don't disassociate. Don't start looking around the room. Really take your time to pay attention to the individual speaking, especially in presentations where often it will be just three or four of you speaking. Another way is through showing interest via eye contact and body language. This is an aspect of active listening that can apply to absolutely every walk of life. Like no matter what you do, just implementing these in your daily like life to life basis is going to be really good. So yeah, don't interrupt either. Like it's just simple classroom rules that will really get you far as well. Don't be interrupting, even if it's really heated or you're really passionate about something. Really just have that impulse control. Take the time to let them speak. And then when you feel like it's an amicable time to do so, simply raise your hand and you can object or you can add on to their point. It's these little things that the assessors tend to catch on. They'll be able to see whether or not someone's capable of, for example, being challenged. That's another big one. And that's where active listening will come in, being able to just have that impulse control. So that's my bit on active listening.
Yeah, I'd say like just to add on to that, like, another way you could show you're actively listening is by after, you've listened to people speak, you've gathered the ideas, incorporating their ideas into what you're saying. It clearly shows you're listening, you're paying attention. In most of the assessment centers I did, I never spoke first. I actually spoke last all the time to show that I was listening. Simple things like maybe bandwagoning on someone else's idea or complimenting someone saying, oh, like this is actually a really good idea. And then adding on your own 2 pence. That's a really quick way to show that you're actively listening. Also makes a great impression for yourself because you're not interrupting, you're not exactly coming across as overbearing, and you're supporting what someone else is saying. So it makes you like a really, really good team player. In my assessment centers, I always say to myself that I view everyone as teammates rather than people I'm competing with, so that it kind of encourages me to listen more to ideas, even if they might sound, a little bit ridiculous at times. It's still best to hear them out. It's still best to, take on board their ideas. I feel that's good. It's just a good way to stand out, really. It's better than trying to be like the overbearing leader and trying to dominate every second of the group task. It won't really get you far, and assessors will quickly mark you down for that. Gonna move on from that. There's nothing else to add on. Now we've got communication, which is extremely important in assessment centers, especially emphasis on clear and confident communication. Now, in assessment centers, of course, pretty much everyone in the group task or in the interview, or even in the Q&A section of current apprentices is encouraged to speak up at least once. I mean, if you don't speak, how can they assess nothing if, you're not really outputting anything? With communication, I'd say one of the biggest things is that you need to have clarity when you're speaking. That can come from, speaking clearly, speaking up when you're talking. It's simple things like that that can make you a clear and confident communicator. If you're in an assessment center and, for example, you might be stuttering a lot, which at times is uncontrollable. In your first few assessment centers, you might be nervous, it's fine, but it can just impact your communication. And that's one of the things assessors are always assessing candidates on. It's the ability to communicate in a group. It's the ability to communicate in a one-on-one situation, or even in, your everyday environment when everyone's socializing before a group task or during the Q&A section. Clear communication looks like speaking slowly, pausing, but not for a long time, and not speaking very, very quickly. I mean, if you speak quickly, then people may miss what you're saying. You might just come across as rash. People might not be willing to hear you out, especially if you're speaking very fast or if you're stuttering a lot. Just sounding confident allows people to listen to you more. And it will also increase the likelihood of people actually willing to hear you out, as opposed to someone who, especially in terms of tonality, the tone of their voice, they might not sound good. They might not sound engaged. They might not sound like they want to be here. But communication is not only a verbal thing, it's also, communicating through your body language, those physical gestures that show that you're going to make a point, or physical cues that show that you're listening. Again, going back to the art of active listening, nodding your head, that's a way of communicating in a positive way. It's a way of communicating the fact that you're engaged, sitting up straight, simple things that people tend to miss in assessment centers. I've seen people in assessment centers slouched on their chairs during a group task. I've seen people in assessment centers looking away on the other side of the room. People are talking, but it's those small things that assessors will definitely notice and will mark you down on. I don't know if you have anything to add, but that's it from me.
No, yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I wouldn't, no need to repeat your words. Let me just get on to the next slide.
Great.
Yeah, so what not to do? Me and Joel are going to interchange between 1 and 2, so I won't be yapping for like 10 minutes straight. But it's really important that I emphasize what you do not do, because any one of these at just one occasion can absolutely tick you off the list and can negate the rest of your work throughout or before the assessment center. So really, 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 really do not do any of these 10, because it's stuff that I've seen from people that have failed, and it's also just common sense, I'd say. Firstly, don't dominate the group discussions. It shows poor teamwork. It shows an absolute lack of empathy, a lack of understanding, and just a lack of social awareness as well. You're expected to work in a team. So by dominating the group discussion and taking over every task and being a bit of a boss, it can work against you. Whilst you may think it's leadership, it shows you're quite an overbearing individual. And often, especially as an apprentice, where you're going to be taking information from senior people, it's not what you want to display. So I'm going to let Joel talk about interrupting and talking over.
Second point, it's really been talked about a lot, but interrupting or talking over the others, probably the absolute worst thing you could possibly do in a group task. Interrupting, talking over people. As it says, it's just disrespectful. It's very off-putting. If you're going to interrupt someone when they start speaking, I mean, no one's going to want to listen to you. It will disrupt the flow of the group task. There are some companies that might reject whole groups because of what you did in terms of interrupting or talking over others. I remember for my PwC assessment center, mine was quite messy in the sense that it was virtual. So a lot of people were interrupting and talking over each other. And I'm pretty sure every one of us got rejected because our group was very disorganized. We had no clear leader. They couldn't tell who was like delegating. They couldn't tell who was doing certain responsibilities. So because of interrupting and people talking over each other, it's the fastest way to get rejected, all things considered. Switching on to Sophia for the third point.
Definitely. Appearing unprepared. This is a massive one. And it's one of those things that, regardless of how good you are at the role, you just have to be mastering this. So there's a few ways you can appear unprepared. Firstly, it's the way you look, simply dressing down. So if everyone's wearing a shirt and tie and you're only coming in like a very, very casual shirt, that's one way of just appearing unprepared. Another way is not knowing all the information you should know. I'm not saying that you should have everything memorized, but if you get a very lengthy email beforehand and you don't read it properly, there could be some very crucial information. So, for example, at an assessment center that both me and Joel were in, apologies. So, at an assessment center that both me and Joel were in, we were given a lot of research to be done beforehand. We were given a lengthy PDF that we should have read, And there were a few individuals that just didn't read it. And what ended up happening was in the middle of a task when we were prepared to know certain information, individuals were just caught out. And no matter how good you are in that assessment center, that lack of preparation immediately is a turn off for assessors. So being prepared is very important. Research as well, just knowing the role to a core basis. It does link towards commercial awareness, but commercial awareness is a bit of an extra, whereas simply knowing your role is a must. So that's another way you can be prepared. And there's also just little things during the assessment, just being able to always stay on top of your tasks, being able to just stay informed throughout is really important. And that's another way that you should just always be prepared during your assessment.
Right, going on to number four, which is giving over-rehearsed answers definitely can come across as inauthentic. You know, if you're giving a scripted answer, it's very likely that throughout your scripted answer, you're going to be trying to memorize what you've memorized in your head. You're probably going to be talking very monotone, which is the part that puts people off. If you're talking very monotone and you're trying to record what you're saying, chances are you won't even be looking at the interviewer because naturally when you're recalling stuff or trying to remember information, your eyes are drifting around. You're trying to remember things. You're not focused on maintaining that eye contact. Recruiters or interviewers will be able to tell instantly that, right, this candidate has obviously got scripted answers. They're not a very authentic individual. And in some cases, it can show to them that you might not be that confident. I mean, if you're trying to give those rehearsed answers word for word, and especially when you're giving those rehearsed answers, you forget one word and then all of a sudden your answer just crumbles. That is the one of the fastest ways in an interview to get instantly rejected for a better
Yeah.
candidate. Even sometimes, like, okay, there's no problem with rehearsing your answers. That's fine. For me, I use a Google Doc to prepare. I have my questions that I think will come up based on the job description and whatnot. I have bullet points for my answers. But having whole paragraphs where word for word you're following that, especially when you've rehearsed the answer day and night, maybe for like 2 days straight, they'll straight away notice easily. When I've been doing a lot of mock interviews recently, and sometimes I can notice when people have over rehearsed their answer, and sometimes I can instantly notice when people haven't rehearsed their answer as much and they're just unprepared. Yeah, moving on to point number five.
Yeah, definitely. So, point number five is neglecting body language. This is something that you're going to really have to clock for yourself, and it's something that you're going to just always have to check yourself on. So, for example, slouching. Your posture is also a big one, but slouching as well. Slouching is something that you do deliberately. It's often out of habit. Fix that. You really want to be like the best way I can explain it is you're always being watched because you more or less are always being watched. So it's these little things like body language that can really just put you down a few points, even though you're putting in the best performance of your life in that assessment center. So slouching or when you're speaking, you're really closed. There's this term called open body language. So for example, my hands are active, they're moving around and I'm animating myself. That's open body language. And that's a positive piece of body language that I'm using right now to make myself feel more confident and be able to express myself better. It's these little things, and it's often mentioned in psychology a lot because body language and psychology are very closely related. It just helps you look better. It's that perception because ultimately it's all about perception. You want to be perceived as the most capable individual, the individual that will get that offer. And you do that via body language. That's a really, really, really big one. And I'd recommend that everyone just take a little bit of their time and a little bit of research towards just actually knowing what good body language means. And it's such a tiny, tiny thing that you'd never really notice, but produces so much of a positive and negative effect in your life. So that's my bit on body language.
Yeah, definitely good points made. For number six, complain or be negative. I don't even think this one needs much explaining, but if you're in an assessment center and you're in the company and you're complaining about things like, oh, why is there no food or why is there no office tour? And an assessor hears that, I think you shouldn't be surprised if you end up getting rejected. No assessor wants someone who's going to be in a firm and is constantly complaining about small things. There are
Yeah.
times where, okay, right, there might not be any food, or the assessment center might be prolonged. One of my assessment centers was around 4 to 6 hours. I remember the one that I was with Sofian, and it was very long, but none of us complained openly because complaining to an assessor, they might not show it, but it's gonna irritate them easily, especially since it's pretty much their company you're talking about. I remember
Yeah.
there was a piece of work experience I was on and I complained about the coffee. I thought it was a small thing, but then I was pulled aside for a one-to-one chat and I got told off for it. So just as little things, it shows that business etiquette, not complaining about things, even if
Yeah.
let's say there's technical difficulties, just not complaining them, you know.
Yeah. I have got another point that does link towards complaining and being negative. You should be very, very selective with your words in regards to your personal life. This is not a therapy session. It's not an opportunity for you to open up about your day and your trials and your tribulations. Be very, very selective with what you talk about, like the content of your words. Because whether you like it or not, you're always being judged. And it's really important that you're presenting yourself in the best way possible and you're not talking about stupid topics. Like if you're in an assessment center, don't talk about Love Island. Don't talk about gossip. Please keep it pro. That's the best way I can explain it. And off of that, you're gonna obviously try not to be negative or try not to complain. Really, really try to. I'm not saying strip the personality away from you because that's ultimately what's gonna get you that offer. But really, really do know how to code switch. Code switch is the best term I use. Just know when is the right and not the right time to speak about certain topics and discuss certain things. So yeah,
Great.
ignoring instructions, plain simple. Just you cannot be doing that. Don't ever think that your defiance or your rebellious nature is gonna play out well in the corporate world because it won't. You're an apprentice. Apprentice means that you are gonna listen to your superiors all the time. You will take their advice. And ultimately, you're always going to be learning because you have zero experience. The same way me and Joel have more or less no experience in the roles we're going into, you guys certainly won't either. So showing defiance or being a rebellious individual in an assessment center won't work. Yeah, that's the main thing I really wanted to emphasize because that boldness really won't get you far in the corporate world.
Yep. Good point. Now moving on to number eight, panicking after mistakes. Everyone's gonna make a mistake in an assessment center, but I feel like what you need to remember is that most of the time, if you do a lot of positive things, like, okay, let's say you make one mistake, like you forget something or you use a lot of filler words, the assessors aren't gonna remember what mistakes you've made. They're normally gonna remember what successes you had during the assessment center, unless, of course, the mistake is like hugely detrimental, like showing up like 1 hour late. That's something obviously I imagine you guys would not do unless due to uncontrollable circumstances. But if in a group task, you misread information or you say something, but in the extract it says something completely different, that's fine. I mean, it's about what you do after to adapt to making that mistake. As it says here, assessors still value resilience and adaptability. You can make a mistake and you can still bounce back from it. You shouldn't let it get you down for the whole thing. And I think it's also up to the candidates that you're with to kind of support you whilst you make a mistake. If you have really good candidates in your group task or just in your assessment center in general, whilst you make a mistake, they'll still be willing to cover for you and they'll still be willing to, kind of lift you back up in terms of morale after making a mistake. Even in an interview, if let's say you say the wrong thing, I don't know, you happen to reference an incorrect piece of news, you're not gonna get punished for it. I mean, they're not after all, you're not expected to have that expertise. You're not expected to know everything, which is the key thing. After all, the whole point of apprenticeships is to kind of teach you the skills, to teach you everything you need to thrive within the industry.
Definitely. Yeah. I think I'll cover 9 and 10 because 9 is almost identical to 3. Just do not overlook that commercial awareness aspect. I know that you may have a billion other things on your mind in terms of interview prep and what you might want to do in group presentations, for example, but really, really, really lock down the basics in terms of your knowledge. So I'll get on to 10, which is being disengaged or distracted. This is something that you should avoid every single time. There's never a situation where appearing disengaged or nonchalant or really pulled back will really benefit you, especially in an assessment center when absolutely everyone is fighting for the attention of the assessor, and fighting for that spotlight, basically. So being disengaged or distracted will automatically remove you from that competition, because instantly you look like the guy that's just there to be there, or just there to like flex about his 10 assessment centers. You want to come into that assessment center with intent and purpose. And the way you do that is by displaying that in your performance. And you do not get that type of aura, that type of result by being disengaged or distracted.
Yeah, definitely. I'll move on to the next slide now, which is looking at handling our nerves. So you go into the assessment center now, everyone is going to be nervous naturally. There's no way in life that for something you care about, you'll never not be nervous. I'd say nerves is a sign that you actually care about what you're about to do. Preparing for nerves before your assessment center, which a lot of people don't talk about a lot, very nerve-wracking. I remember my first assessment center. My whole body was shaking, I'm gonna be honest. Even right before I started the assessment center, I was extremely nervous. Leading up to it, I wasn't that nervous. I was trying to convince myself that, it's fine, it's my first assessment center and I'll completely smash it out of the park. But yeah, I got nervous a few hours before. Handling your nerves before is coming to terms with the fact that you've been picked because you're you. The assessors have taken an interest in you because of your core competencies and your core strengths, which means that you have little to no reason to be nervous, honestly, or it will help you with controlling your nerves. I guess another reason to calm your nerves is, if you really have time, maybe the day before or on the day, do a little mock interview with one of your friends or one of your family, just run through some questions. Will help you alleviate those nerves. And then remember that the people you're competing with in your assessment center, most of the candidates are very helpful, very friendly, as long as you're friendly to them. Same goes for the assessors. They're all going to be friendly. They're all going to love to see you there. They're all going to want to get to know you because you never know. That could be the future cohort that you're working with coming 2026 September, when everyone hopefully gets an offer and everyone starts. During the assessment center, handling your nerves, of course, you're going to feel nervous once you get inside. For the first few hours, you're probably going to be shaking and stuff. But one thing I'd advise is actually coming early. We talked about the punctuality before. It's just a bit of business etiquette. But coming, let's say, 30 minutes early, 15 minutes early. I remember I arrived at almost every single one of my assessment centers at least 30 minutes early, just to take in the environment. Sometimes the assessor is there early as well, just to talk to them, get some conversation, and then talk to some candidates who arrive early. It's a great way to handle the nerves. Makes you feel a lot better, and it might alleviate any feelings of imposter syndrome. And even after the assessment center, you might get nervous about the outcome. Just remember that you've done the best that you could possibly do. There's nothing
Yeah.
much else you can do. It's just best to just take it out of your mind, go and do something you enjoy, go and indulge yourself in some hobbies and whatnot. At the end of the day, you've gave it your best shot. And that's the mindset that ultimately you should be having going into the assessment center and even after the assessment center.
Yeah. And just the pro tip that I'd like to mention that isn't the one listed there. Another thing that I found really put me down was always telling people about my assessment centers and interviews, because automatically you've got this burden now of, oh, what if I don't get it? And this person asks, and this could be absolutely anyone from like your dad all the way to like a distant person that you only stumbled across once. I think really, really I'd say guard your interviews and assessment centers like close to you until you know you're comfortable with the outcome. So really make sure that you're just keeping it to yourself and you're not telling everyone about your business, because what will end up happening is people will become invested in your journey, whether you like it or not. And then that unnecessary expectation that other people will have on you is just a piece of workload that you just don't need in your life. So that's something that I used throughout my apprenticeship process.
Great tip. Now moving on to the next slide.
Yeah, building relationships. This is another thing that I'm really passionate about, because if I had to attribute one really, really big thing towards my office, it would probably be building relationships. And this is something that I did constantly throughout the entire apprenticeship process, but most importantly in assessment centers, because this is where you're really able to interact with not only the people that want to apply, but the people that are already there. Often in assessment centers, you'll get introduced to the current cohort of apprentices. You may have a current cohort of apprentices at the firm, and often they'll come and speak to you just to settle your nerves. It's often during the break part where they'll just bring them in just to settle your nerves and discuss about the company a bit. That is a really, really, really key part to building relationships, because often these individuals that speak to you have to give feedback on the candidates that they talked about. And I was told after I received my offer, one of the reasons that I got it was because of my ability to just build a rapport with individuals within the firm. For example, I had a very good relationship with one of the paralegals I met. I had another good relationship with one of the partners I met. These are people at absolute opposite ends of the seniority spectrum, you could call it. And both of them really helped me not only settle my nerves, but also just build a rapport and a relationship within the firm when I haven't even got the offer, showing that capability to be able to not only speak to people, but have meaningful dialogue. Meaningful dialogue is really important, because that little small talk you have with someone for maybe 10 to 20 seconds, they won't remember that. But that 10-minute discussion about how you can settle your nerves, or how you can project your voice better, or how you can do better in interviews, people tend to remember those. So really try to build relationships where possible. I'd recommend in the assessment center with any colleagues in the firm, just really take the time to introduce yourself, just speak about what's on your mind. Maybe you're a tiny bit nervous about the interview and you want to just discuss about a few things with the recruitment head. That's a brilliant way to just build a relationship just off the bat. Often you won't even like plan some of these. Like, for example, I was at the elevator for one of my assessment centers and I saw an individual who happened to be assessing a bunch of people. He didn't assess me specifically, but he was assessing my cohort. And just off of that, I had a 2-minute conversation on the elevator and later down the hallway that I could spin into something very good. And off of that, he gave positive feedback about me. And it's just those little things, as I said previously, that really get you further. So really, really do try build relationships as you go.
Yeah, and I can definitely testify for the building a relationship with not just, the candidates that you're being assessed with, but also the employees within the firm. I remember for the assessment center that I got the one that led to my offer, I spoke to, even before the assessment center, I spoke to one of the current apprentices who introduced me to pretty much the whole apprentice cohort that was there on the day. So when everyone came in on the day, I'd already sat in a 30-minute Zoom call or Teams call with them, and I was speaking to all of them about, my thoughts and like how I was feeling. They gave me great advice. I saw them on the day. So when it came to, it's funny because on the day, and I went to the toilet in the morning, I remember, and all of them were just there in the toilet. It was actually hilarious. I saw every single one of the current apprentices. It was just great to talk to them again, and they gave that positive feedback back to the hiring manager. Again, when it was time for Q&A of current apprentices, I was able to speak to every single one of them without even having to, go up and introduce myself, because I already had prior to the assessment center. Even sparing a few minutes with the recruiter, right before my interview, I remember I spoke to the recruiter and she asked me how I was feeling. And again, I told her that, I'm here for a reason, you invited me because of who I am. I'm just gonna give it my best shot. It's those little conversations that can really make the difference. It's how you make that impression. Making a first impression is pretty. Making a good first impression can be easy. You come in, you dress smart and all of that, but making a lasting impression comes with actually speaking to people. Leaving that impression, letting them know how you are personally as a candidate outside of just the interview and group task. So yeah, that's my little golden nugget.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to take questions via the Q&A chat bot, which you'll find on the bottom of your screen. And I'd also just like to extend a massive thank you for joining the last session of the August Apprenticeship Series. We've had hundreds of sign-ups, hundreds of questions, and some really, really nice memories built. And this is just the start for the Apprentice Room. And on behalf of the entire roster and Joel. We're just so glad that you guys are actually enjoying what we're producing in terms of content, in terms of the webinar series. And I'd really urge you guys to stay tuned because there'll be a lot more coming on. And I'm sure Joel would like to give a few words, and I'll just be taking a look at the questions.
Yeah, just I'm really grateful for the support that I've received. You know, some people have messaged me personally to give me positive feedback on LinkedIn or on my TikTok page, which is always very heartwarming to see. I obviously I as Sofian said, we didn't expect to receive this much support. We didn't expect to receive this much positive feedback, but this webinar series has been a huge success. People are finding value in this and it's helping a lot of people, which is obviously what we love to see. It's been a pleasure hosting the series, and again, which has been my favorite part of the whole series, the Q&A section where people ask some very good questions. So yeah, it's been a pleasure hosting this series. Now we'll be taking questions, we'll be answering questions for the remainder of this.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I think we'll start with Ramesa, who said, which months do assessment centers typically happen? For example, are they during weekdays or weekends typically? So assessment centers can vary in time. I'd say the peak assessment center period is from about December to April. You will never find them past April purely because of A-level exams, and you won't really find them past December because it doesn't give them enough time to go through all of the stages before the assessment center process. So I'd say anywhere between December and April with a peak of about February and March. That's what I'd say. And weekdays or weekends, they're always on weekdays because the employees that are hosting the assessment centers, so naturally they'll be working on weekdays. You'll almost never find them on weekends unless it's a really weird bank holiday or something. So yeah.
Yeah, good answer. Don't have anything to add. Got a question here. If the questions aren't in a normal format, e.g., tell me about a time when, how can you identify what the question's actually asking about? There will be times where instead of that, it will be like a scenario, a hypothetical scenario where it'll be like, oh, you're working in the firm and you've made a mistake explaining a product to a client. How do you go about dealing with this? At the end of the day, the way to identify it helps by looking at the job. One, look at the job description. So already know what skills they're looking for. 9 times out of 10 in the job description, they're gonna have a list of the saying, our ideal candidate should have these following skills. You know, you might have teamwork, integrity, resilience. With the question I just used as an example, that's looking at adaptability. How can you adapt to making a mistake? You know, what do you do? It comes with doing more interviews or mock interviews. Ultimately, you're going to have to get first-hand exposure to those type of questions. There are the clear strengths-based questions and motivational questions where it's obviously easy to identify what they're asking for. But then there's, you know, those competency and scenario-based questions. They might be a little bit more clear. But yeah, it does come with more practice ultimately. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes. So how do you handle online assessment centers? Me personally, I absolutely hate them. I feel like online assessment centers kind of take out the good bit of the assessment center, which is actually meeting the people that not only are applying, but also the people at the firm. So I don't enjoy them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't display any of the techniques or any of the tips that we've employed in today's session. In terms of how you'd handle them, I'd emphasize having good Wi-Fi. You just don't want bad Wi-Fi. You don't want to be going across a point and then you cut out. You don't want to be able to have a poor mic quality. So really being prepared in the technical standpoint is very important. I can't really say much more other than that. Really just try emphasize and highlight all the good bits about you. So for example, in my only online assessment center I made it very clear that I was capable of working with other people. And I did that by projecting myself properly. I was very communicative. So I was using the chat a lot. I was using my microphone a lot. And I was doing a lot of the discussion because it's a tiny bit harder to catch on the good bit in an assessment center when it's online. So that's really the best advice I can give you, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely echo that. It's ultimately it's just going to be harder during online assessment centers. One thing I did during mine was I used the raise your hand function just to make it more organized with the group. Had people raise hands if they wanted to contribute, although it still led to people interrupting each other, but it's the effort that counts at the end of the day. Moving on to the next question. How can you avoid being over rehearsed in your answers even if you haven't rehearsed them? All comes down to verbal communication at the end of the day. It's mainly the tonality of your voice. If you sound very monotone and you just sound like, there's a certain way people sound, they'll sound very robotic, they won't change tones. They might not even be looking your way. You can tell they're probably trying to record the answer that's in their head, or they're just like overall not engaged, that type of thing. To avoid it, it's probably best to, smile when you're speaking. When you say certain things that might be exciting, you might want to show that enthusiasm by doing that open body language, again, maybe moving out your hands or maybe just smiling when you're speaking at certain points in time. Let's say you're describing an achievement and you're talking about what the result was, I don't know, of your A-level exams, smiling when you're talking about that. It just shows you're more natural, it shows you have more emotion to yourself. It comes with more practice, of course. It's not easy to sound not rehearsed, but it comes to doing more mock interview practice, which is why I always kept on doing that constantly.
Yeah, definitely. Is it important to build relationships with people from the business before you even get there, or is it okay to just connect whilst you're there? Me personally, I did a lot of outreach beforehand. So prior to my assessment centers, what I did is I reached out to not only apprentices in the current role I was in, but I went for the really senior people, the people you wouldn't necessarily expect to get back. Funnily enough, these guys who are on 200-300 grand a year are on LinkedIn a lot. So often they'll respond to you. And even if it's a very small, concise message, it's enough to build a relationship and it's enough to mention during your interview. So I'd highly urge you guys to try and just practice building a little bit of a relationship with individuals beforehand, because what you will find out is when you get in there, you already have something supporting. You already have like a trophy you can say that you can hold and be like, okay, I've already done this and we haven't even started the thing. So that's something that you can talk about in interviews, or it's even something that you can slip in the group tasks. Just say, actually, I spoke to a partner in corporate law, and he really talked about how this aspect of law is really going high. I think we can use that. Just slipping it in, inserting it in there in the conversation is just a very, very good way of just getting yourself a few points, basically.
Yeah, bouncing off that, when you do build relationships with people before, it's a way to ease your nerves as well. You've spoken to people within the firm, so you have a taster of how the culture is. You have a taster of how people are within the firm. If you speak to current apprentices, even the recruiter, or even senior people, it really, really eases your mind. You're going to the assessment center, you're thinking, I've already done this. I've spoken to a few people and they already know me. They might even be there, and if you see them there, it's like a huge stress reliever because in that way, you're dealing with familiar faces. It's kind of like seeing your friends in a serious environment. You won't be nervous if you're with your friends, if you have to present or something like that. So yeah, I definitely recommend reaching out before. You can do it during, but before just puts you at a huge advantage.
Documents and the assessment center. So when applying, how did you prepare for the assessment centers when given documents? Uh, um, this,
Cool.
this is quite a case by case basis. So for my last assessment center, I was given documents about a case that happened in South America. I didn't get any questions off of that. All I was given was the information. So naturally, you'd be quite perplexed. You'd be thinking, why am I learning about this random event that happened in South America? What ended up happening was it related to the stock price of another company, and there was that correlation. Then the most I can tell you is use what you've got. So if you profile something, absolutely memorize that profile. Think about why they're struggling, why they're doing really well. Think about external factors that can impact them. Just prepare as much as humanly possible. The one thing about assessment centers is often you have that opportunity to do well beforehand. Whereas the interviews, you have to just rock up, and assessments is you bring that in your head beforehand and use it in the rest of the bad can give you documents.
Don't know if I'm cutting out.
But I think I'll
Might,
just get
yeah,
on to the. Yeah, was that me or you?
yeah. I think I'm cut. I think I'm cutting out a bit. Yeah, I think I should be back now.
Okay,
So
cool.
I'll take the next question. When the interviewer asks at the end, "Do you have any questions? What is the best way to stand out in this?" I'd say instantly. Again, talks about
Ooh,
commercial
good question.
awareness. Just asking a question that might relate to the news if you want to stand out. That's one easy way. It's like a low-hanging fruit. If you ask about, oh, I read the news and I saw AI XYZ might be doing this. Just trying to get that conversation going. Some interviewers might be passionate about talking about AI and how it might be shaping their role, or even the industry, or even the company itself. Very good way to stand out. Another good way to stand out is maybe to ask questions about, ask about how to stand out. One good question to ask is like maybe ask about what's the biggest challenges that an apprentice might face within the first 3 months or so. Very good question to show that you're a forward thinking um individual. You're thinking about the future. You think about what could happen next. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm
yeah.
just checking if I was cutting out or not. I'd say a few other
And to build off of that point, because that no, we
yeah, appreciate it.
can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear
Okay,
you.
yeah, yeah. Just to build off of that, it was a really good question in terms of standing out. The best thing I could really emphasize is being different in a way that puts you enough. What I'd recommend the route you'd go down in terms of asking questions is try relate it back to the interviewer, because what people naturally like is to speak about themselves and their own experiences. It's a very self-gratifying thing, and if you can utilize that to your own advantage when asking questions, it can really get you ahead. So for example, what I'd often do is I'd ask about their own experiences at the firm. Could you tell me an example that just reminded you why you applied to the firm in the first place? Really draw at their memories, their nostalgia, and their own experiences and accolades, and utilize that to your advantage. Because subconsciously, they're going to like you because you've provided them that dopamine, that reward of being able to talk about themselves. It's a very deep psychological habit that I read in a book one time in regards to interviews and assessment centers. And it's something that I've used ever since and has reaped great rewards.
Exactly, definitely agree with that. Taking the next question, I think I'll go for the top. You mentioned how certain companies they give you dope. Okay, I think that's been answered already.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been answered. Yeah. Next question. When do you receive feedback for how you earn AC? Probably like a week after. Sometimes, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're lucky, you might get it within a few days, but normally a week or two after, get feedback in the form of an email, or you might get a rejection, but then they'll offer to like give you a phone call where it might be optional, but they'll talk you through your feedback in detail. They'll probably have like a sheet of information they read where the assessors have given it to HR. They basically just read what's been given to them. And yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a very
Yeah.
quick
And
one.
and absolutely never deny feedback. Sounds stupid as to why you do that, but I just wanted to emphasize that feedback, regardless of how small or common sense it may sound, it's valuable because it's coming from them. It's coming from a person that heard you speak and heard you provide an input. You can't see yourself, but other people can. So even the tiniest of remarks, you should really take that on board in your consolidation after both a rejection and a successful assessment center.
Yeah, definitely. Got a question here. It's from someone who's saying in an assessment center, you expected to speak very formally. I'm not sure what you mean by very formally, but there is a line of professionalism that must be maintained when you're speaking. Essentially, just don't use slang. I guess a way to think about it is like speak like, let's say your parents are watching you, or speak like a teacher would be watching you, have that line of professionalism. Again, talk about that code switching, incorporate that code switching, especially in the group task. You don't want assessors hearing you using formal words or trying to make jokes like on purpose, because that can really come off as very unserious. You might look unprepared in a sense that like you're not prepared for working in a corporate environment. So yeah, that's very, very quick, very good question to be fair. Very good question.
Yeah, we've got a very, very nice question actually from Khadija about what would you say is one thing that helps you stand out? the best thing I can say, and it's something I've emphasized from the very first offer I got, play on your own experiences because you are absolutely you. There's no other you out there, and it's only you who has this specific set of experiences and memories in life. So the best thing you can do with that is play on that authenticity and that originality and help it mold your personality and help you stand out with that. Because often people tend to try and mold themselves towards this like model applicant, and often what you end up doing is you just turn yourself into a stereotype or a really generic individual. Whereas if you simply talk about your own experiences and you don't try fake this persona of being a certain individual, it can really help you stand out. For example, during my interviews, a lot of the experiences I used weren't necessarily corporate experiences. So, for example, I talked about one time where I got lost at an airport and I had absolutely no idea how to navigate. I didn't speak the language, but I talked about when I was like, yeah, 9 years old. I simply used the Translate app and I found someone wearing a high vis, and off of that, I could get to my gate. It sounds really like almost stupid, but it helped me make myself stand out because absolutely everyone else was talking about this fancy corporate work experience at this certain law firm or bank, and it didn't help them differentiate themselves. Whereas I was able to draw towards a personal experience that still displayed the skills that needed to be displayed, displaying that adaptability, displaying that responsibility. So that's the best advice I can give you. And I'm sure Joel's got something to say about that too.
Yeah, I'd say like coming off of that, definitely echo everything Sofian has said. I'd say one thing that made me stand out was probably my ability to build relationships and ease nerves through being relatable. Being relatable, very underrated trait to have. In an assessment center, if everyone's nervous, if everyone, people might be silent in a room, being the one to break the silence, make a joke that's in line with professions, of course. Maybe talk about how, Tubes, the TFL might have been doing XYZ today or something like that. Things that, everyone would be able to relate to, being that person that's extremely friendly within an assessment center. You might be in your third assessment center, people might be there for the first time. Just showing to them that, not every, even though you're competing, not every candidate is going to be super competitive. At the end of the day, it's a day to get to know potential people that you might be working with. So, having that relatability, having that relationship building skill, even sometimes assessors or people interviewing you might be nervous. You might be being interviewed by people who are fresh off a grad scheme at that, which is very rare, but it can happen. They might be nervous to interview. They might have not done it before. Making them feel at ease and making the interview easy for them. It's a way to, build relationships fast, trying to make things conversational. It's how I stood out. It's how I always receive positive feedback for being overall just a very positive person to be around.
Yeah, definitely. Lovely answer. Is there a way to attend mock assessment centers and did you do any of that? Did I do any of that? No, I didn't do any mock interviews or assessment centers purely because I didn't really have the people around me to do so. But one of the fabulous things about the Apprentice Room is that we're going to be providing services and spaces that aren't originally there. And one of them will be the opportunity to secure mentorship with one of our roster members who, by the way, we have members from every single industry. So regardless of what career path you're aspiring towards, there will be an individual who will obviously have the same goals and experiences as you. And we will be providing mock assessment centers and interviews, hopefully in the future. It's definitely on the agenda. And as I said, stay tuned because there's a lot more coming. Creative ideas and just things that weren't originally there for us when we were processors.
Yep, definitely can. Again, very good from Sofian. In terms of did I do any mock assessment centers? I did two from what I remember. I think one good organization you can look at joining is the brokerage. I think they might be open right now for, sign-ups. You can sign up to the brokerage, quick and easy application. There's no don't need to give some sort of like huge motivational answer as to why you join. Just sign up. Hopefully you meet the social mobility requirements and they do host events. It's quite infrequent that they do mock assessment centers, but in their I quote the program, Deutsche Bank working in the city, they do a mock assessment center in the form of a trading game. Very good practice. An organization you can currently join for mock assessment centers. Outer Circle do a few. I'm not sure if they're doing any at the moment, but from time to time they'll do a few mock assessment centers. I think it's really useful for people to get involved. And also Sutton Trust, if you're in any of their pathways programs, sometimes they do mock assessment centers. It's very rare, but they do some. So yeah, but ultimately you won't really be able to practice like that. It's very rare. At the moment, there's not a lot of, organizations or companies that are providing this experience. Maybe that's answered that. Just looking at other questions. Okay, yeah, right.
Is the individual who actually hires you, whereas the assessor is the person at the specific assessment center who's assessing you. So a recruiter is often involved in the entire process, whereas the assessor is often just called in and they're not necessarily even trained to interview. They're just called in and asked to review the applicants upon a certain mark scheme, whether it be collaboration or the company values. So that's the difference between a recruiter and an assessor. A recruiter is the one who's actually doing the hiring and is often heading the entire application process.
Yep. Good answer. Got a question from someone saying, how long after completing? Well, to be fair, that has been answered earlier, but you receive feedback a week or two after. Normally, if you get accepted, you'll probably receive the feedback faster. Normally, sometimes companies might do the other way around. They might reject candidates first and then they might give you a phone call. I got my acceptance in the form of a surprise phone call where they contacted me earlier a week after, and they rejected everyone a few weeks after that. So, it varies from company to company.
Yeah, completely agreed. I had the exact same experience.
Oh, I think this question is
How did the
actually no,
Oh
you
yeah,
can
no,
go.
Joe, you can take over.
Okay, should I? Okay.
How did the assessment center go compared to what you expected? And was there anything that surprised you? Did it go as to how I expected? I'd say the second, the third, and the fourth did because I knew what an assessment center was like. Once you do the first one, you kind of get like you start to understand the drill. You start to understand what's expected from you, how other people are going to act around you, how the assessments actually go. Also, just the pressure, that pressure becomes normal to you. That's another really important part to actually handling your nerves. So I'd say the second, the third, and the fourth assessment centers, they went exactly how I expected them to go. In terms of did they surprise me? Absolutely all of them surprised me at some point. Some were easier than others. Some had aspects that were really easy for me, like the group tasks. I've never really struggled speaking to others. I found that it was quite easy for me to communicate with other individuals and project my voice. But for example, the solo interviews where it was really technical work did get hard, and it did surprise me with some of the questions that I got from the interviewer. For example, I was asked about where my industry would go for in 20 years with the presence of audit. And I was absolutely boggled. I had no clue, and it surprised me. And it's those little things where it really just calls upon your ability to adapt and your ability to just navigate those issues. And yeah, that's what I'd say in terms of that question. I'm sure Charles got something to say.
Yeah, I think in terms of my assessment centers, first one, it's always gonna ultimately, and you're always gonna be blown away because it's your first time experience. And in terms of my second, third, and fourth, actually no, I believe I only did three and rejected the rest. So with my second one, which was virtual, again, that was my first virtual one. So again, it was surprising. I had my second virtual one, which was with EY, and that went. I think it was surprising in the sense that EY, like for anyone who gets to the final stage of EY or anyone who's already done it, 2 days before the assessment center, they give you everything you need to know about the group task. They tell you what the group task is. They give you, the information to read off. You can take notes beforehand and walk in to the assessment center and have everything ready. I was extremely surprised and the support was immense. In my final assessment center that led to my offer, I think what was surprising was in my interview, the very first question I got asked was, tell me everything you know about the company. That was all they asked. It was a very, very open-ended question. I was blown away by the question, but of course I had prepared like everything I knew about the company. So it was just a little bit unexpected. I guess the final thing that surprised me is that the majority of my final interviews, I had two people interviewing me. So for one of my assessment centers that I did with Sofian, I had two people interviewing me. For my assessment center that led to my offer, I had two people interviewing me. So again, there's a lot of you'll never not be surprised in any assessment centers. Basically, the point we're trying to get across. Hopefully, I just answered that well. I've got a personal question for myself. If I buy any test preparation package on JTP, which one would you recommend? I don't know anyone I could divide the cost with, so I'm only able to buy one. Oh, I'm not sure if you want to take on the cost yourself. It's quite a hefty subscription. You might want to find at least, if you can't manage a lot, maybe two to three people to split it across. But I personally use, it's going to sound funny, but I use the basic summer internship preparation package. Now, the reason I use that for finance is because a lot of the summer internship online assessments for uni students are going to mirror the exact ones that they use for apprenticeships. The online assessments will have the exact same questions. They'll be recycled on a year-to-year basis. They might swap a few out, they might put a few in. But the good thing about job test prep is that you pay for the subscription, you get that package. It gives you the exact questions. Even in the situational judgment questions, it tells you when you're right or when you're wrong. Normally, it won't tell you that in the real thing. So you know what the company's looking for. Very good tool, very good package to practice with. Hopefully that answers that question. We have two. Oh, Sophia, you're on mute.
Apologies. We've got one regarding the pass rate for assessment centers. Um, the numbers I'm gonna throw at you, they're not necessarily the nicest ones. For example, for my last assessment center, it was around 36 individuals, and they got four candidates out of that. So four of the 36. You can do the maths. It's not incredible. What I'd recommend is you don't do the maths. Don't try calculate how hard it's gonna be, because it's not gonna help you if it's quite easy and maybe they're taking a lot of people in for the amount of candidates there are. It's going to give you this false sense of pride, and you're going to tell yourself, oh, it's easy, they're taking half the people, like I can like kind of relax a bit. No, same goes for if they're taking very few people. You're going to like always, you're going to start mentally disqualifying yourself already. You're going to be like, oh, they all have this and I'm over here. And it's a level of like mental clutter that you don't need. So pass rates tend to hover about 5 to 30%. It varies so much that there's no point of even trying to calculate it. Really just focus on what actually matters, which is being prepared and being the best version of yourself on the day, instead of stressing over pass rates, because they're almost never positive. Like they'll never make you feel good. So just don't really bother with them, in my experience at least.
Yeah, 100%. Like if I gave you my pass rate for the offer that I have now, I could it just wouldn't be a nice number. I mean, what's 1/2000 plus? You could probably do the maths in your calculator.
Yeah,
You don't want
yeah,
to calculate that and have that in your head, because that's literally mind games. Like you're just gonna be thinking, oh, how am I gonna be the only candidate to get selected? Even when I was at my assessment center, I had around 12 people in mine, and I already knew, oh, only one person's gonna get the offer. But I didn't really think about it too much, because if you focus on that, it's just going to throw you off for the remainder of the assessment center. So don't worry about that too much.
definitely.
Seeing a question. Oh, got a question from Omatola. What type of information are you expected to know? Wait, what's that? Wait, what type of information are you expected to know? I'm really quite understanding the question due to SPAG. But okay, I think what you're trying to say is what type of information should you know in terms of researching companies? I think that's what you're asking. In terms of that, so you want to research obviously who the company is, what they specialize in, the industry they're in. You might want to look at their competitors as well. You might want to know, some recent news that has led to, let's say, affected the success of the company. And a low-hanging fruit is looking at, their revenue reports. It's one way to quickly look at the company's success, or just looking at let's say, any sort of initiative, sustainability initiative that they might be working on. Again, you also want to look at the role in question that you're applying for. That goes without saying, but putting special emphasis on that. And I guess, yeah, I think that's pretty much. We should also know the company's core values, maybe their core principles, maybe not so much emphasis on the mission statement. It might be nice to know. And essentially, you want to be able to research that to the point where if you are asked about, you know, again, the question that I got asked was, tell me everything you know about the company. You can regurgitate that information back to them in a natural way that makes you look like, you might even work for the firm. Hopefully that answers your question. We've got another question that says how to approach direct interview questions. I'm not really quite sure what you're asking for here, how to approach direct interview questions. I mean, if you're talking about like in-person interviews, how to approach them, you're just going to want to do as many mock interviews as possible. How to predict the questions, you've got the usual motivational questions. We talked about this in a previous webinar. We had a list of questions that you should prepare for. If you want to ever go back and watch the video, you can watch that. But you've got some usual motivational questions such as why the company, why the role, why the industry, why not this, or why did you pick this instead of this? Why'd you pick apprenticeship over university? And you have your usual competency-based questions, which will vary based on the skills required. But some scenarios to prepare for, or some that might be worth preparing for, is teamwork, communication, adaptability, problem solving, taking initiative, or leadership, or looking at negative feedback. It's a bit rare, but they might throw that in there. Just comes with practice ultimately. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, we've got something in regards to what you could have done differently in your assessment centers. I'm sure Joel's got a lot to say. I think what I would have done differently, I'm quite happy with the way I handled mine. I obviously learned things along the way. I would probably say I'd be like a bit more relaxed, to be honest. I came into a lot of my assessment centers like so ridiculously dialed in that like I've removed every other aspect of like of my life and like purely dedicated myself towards the assessment center. And at times it just really wasn't necessary. Like you're still a human being and it's okay to feel certain ways. Embrace the emotions you have. Like I was quite nervous and I really just like disregarded my emotions and purely like dedicated myself towards the prep or on the journey there. I was just not in the right headspace. I was just too locked in, if that makes sense. Really, I think just cherish it, really like just taking the experience for what it is. Because ultimately, like assessment centers that they're hard, but they can be quite fun. Ultimately, you're working with people you've never met before. 99% of the time, they're really, really lovely people. I know so many individuals from my like connections and my network from assessment centers and interviews, and just being a personable individual is really important, and often being far too focused strips you of your personality. That's my experience and I don't know how many others can share that, but I'd probably be a tiny bit more relaxed going in next time. But yeah, that's my insight.
Yeah, again, I'd slightly actually echo exactly what Sofian said in terms of, I came in a little bit tense to my first year assessment centers. Obviously, with the most recent one I did, I think for me personally, that went like as perfectly as it could have. I'd say one thing I wish I did more, which I didn't do a lot, although normally they say the Q&A section of current apprentices, or you might have an office tour section or something like that. Just a portion that isn't for the group task or interview. Something I wish I did differently was just communicate more with people. After the group task and interview, I kind of just switched off. I was kind of just, I'm ready to go home now. Let's just get this out the way so I can leave the building and, go home and relax. I wish I communicated more with my cohort. Because I didn't actually communicate much with them. I didn't take the opportunity to, grab LinkedIn's or grab any form of social media that we can use to stay in touch because the people I met were very good, very lovely people, but I just didn't stay in touch with them. A slight regret, but other than that, I think my most recent assessment center went as good as it could have. But yeah, very, very good question. Very good question. Got another question saying, where can you get free assessment center tests? I can only find websites for packages I need to pay for. You probably won't be able to get like, you won't be able to like buy or purchase an assessment center test. It's almost impossible. If you're talking about online assessments, yeah, you can purchase preparation packs and whatnot. Assessment centers, yeah, it's nearly impossible. Probably won't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't have much work experience, does that put you at a major disadvantage? I was kind of waiting for someone to ask this question because it's such an important one and one that I really want to emphasize. Work experience is an addition. It's not something that you require. It's never a requirement. Like I've never seen, and I highly doubt you will see a company that demands work experience in the industry because firstly, it's very hard as it is to simply get an employment. So work experience in a very competitive industry is more or less unheard of at 16 and 17. What they look for is skills. They want to know that you're capable of developing because you're an apprentice, you're going to develop yourself into a professional and you don't need work experience to prove that. As I've mentioned on previous occasions and even today, I went across to my personal side of my life and I gathered the skills that I've got from my personal experiences and related that to the interview and assessment center. And I did that on numerous occasions. Even when I had work experience, I had more than enough relevant work experience. The work experience didn't get me the offer because everyone had it. Everyone had work experience at this flashy firm, at this bank, at this corporation, and they're not necessarily impressed of you just being able to say a name. What they are impressed at is your ability to draw towards experiences and get results out of that. And you can do that with absolutely anything. So, to any of you guys who don't have much experience and are feeling like your CV is a tiny bit empty, it's completely fine. And what I'd also urge you guys to do is if you feel like your CV doesn't have enough, draw towards that personal side a bit. So, for example, I volunteer at the food bank at my mosque. That's not something you'd necessarily think is a very corporate thing, but by putting that in my CV, I showed how I'm quite a humble and level to ground individual, someone that appreciates the little things in society and wants to give back. That's not corporate by any means. It was a very uncorporate setting. I was just hauling food boxes around. But that's something that was brought up on multiple interviews and really pushed me forward. So that's the main thing I'd urge you guys to really, really look at. Don't stress about the work experience. If everyone has it, it's not special. What is special is your own experiences, the ones you've had. And I'm sure Joel completely agrees.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything that's been said. Again, building on that last point, having the work experience is not special, but it's rather your value and your own personal story that comes with that. If you have a lot of work experience, you're just going to look like every other candidate on a CV. What differentiated me from different candidates was having that, people don't have those extracurricular sections. There's a misconception that you need to have every piece of work experience in your CV. People neglect the extracurriculars, the things that stretch outside of, just having that work experience. My situation, and I've even, if anyone follows my socials, I've even posted a TikTok about work experience recently. My situation was that I landed an offer with only one piece of in-person work experience, and the rest of my work experiences were all virtual. Coming into year 13, this time last year, I had absolutely zero work experience. I have nothing on my CV. This is just a testament to the fact that you don't need a lot of work experience to land an offer. I have an
Exactly.
offer at a global asset manager. You don't need a million pieces of experience to go into high finance or to go into law. It's more about the skills. They're looking for the skills that come out of, extracurriculars. Like you might run a finance society, for example. You might be like a senior prefect, or you might be head boy. These are things that you can draw on to show that you're employable in the real world. And again, part-time job, we've talked about before, extremely strong. It's one of my biggest regrets. I wish I had a part-time job. Very good thing that you can draw on from very early on, as opposed to getting a bunch of work experience.
Definitely, completely agree. We've got a lovely question from Khadija, which is, if you only have a few days to prepare, what would you recommend focusing on the most? Just to say, a few days is more than enough time. I wouldn't really say or stretch the time of a few days. I personally, I don't necessarily advise this tactic. I did it. I prayed at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and I just stayed awake, and I just got there really early, and I spent the very long morning to do all of my preparation. It's all the time I needed. And what I did was I clued myself up on what the company did. I knew exactly what their missions were, what their values were. I knew just some statistics that you'd only really know unless you like scoured the website. For example, 52% of the partners were female, and I mentioned that in my interview. It's these little things here that push you over the edge. In terms of prep for the assessment center, what else I did? I don't know, Joel. What would you think? Anything that you did that was really special that got your head? Because a lot of the prep just happens over time as you go further in the application process. Just learn more.
Yeah, definitely. Like some of the prep will be done for you already as you go through the
Yeah,
interview process. So for me, my assessment center that led to my offer, I prepared the night before. So I actually slept really early and woke up really early. I did all my prep in the morning, just like Sofian did. The things, if you've absolutely done no preparation, you're in an emergency situation, you've done absolutely nothing, you've forgotten everything from your interview somehow. The things you want to prepare the usual motivational questions. You want to prepare, tell me about yourself. You want to prepare the why the company. You want to prepare why the role. You want to prepare knowledge on the company as well. Just as Sofian said, you want to prepare, who the company is, something that makes them stand out from their competitors. You might want to have their core values in your head as well, just floating around. On the off chance that they ask you about core values, you have that there. You want to look at the job description again, just quickly refresh yourself. What is the role? What does it do? Are you able to explain the role to other people? Are you able to answer the competency and situational questions that come up? You want to have that on a document where you can just read off it and kind of go through the bullet points, go through your answers, kind of like flashcards, do that active recall, spaced repetition, keep on doing it again and again. Maybe if you have time, get someone else to test you. Look at again, going back to looking at the job description. If you don't know what they might ask in terms of scenario-based questions, the key skills, the secret trick that I always tell people is that the key skills are what they're going to ask you in the competency and scenario-based questions. It will always be on what the key skills are. So when I say skills like teamwork, when I say skills like integrity, they're almost guaranteed to ask you questions that kind of revolve around those key skills that they're looking for. It's a way to speed up your preparation. Once you know what to prepare, it becomes a lot easier. And I'd say max, it probably take you like 2 to 3 hours to actually prepare everything. Maybe at the very most 4 hours straight,
yeah,
just preparation.
yeah.
Hopefully that was that question. Very good question.
We've got a question from Anmol. Is the uni and study side hard? Quick notice, we're not apprentices yet. We're incoming apprentices, and obviously, as we get into our apprenticeships, we'll be posting a plethora of content in regards to both the uni and the work side. From what I know, and I do know quite a lot in regards to what the uni and study side is like, it's hard. It's like A levels. It demands you to have a constant focus constantly. There's deadlines, there's coursework involved. So it doesn't necessarily get easier. But the good thing I'd say about the study side is that the work you're doing alongside the studying is going to supplement your knowledge. You're going to always draw back to your studying. I think one thing about A levels that I wouldn't say was difficult or was a bit annoying. I wasn't really drawing towards my knowledge outside of school. So, for example, for maths, when I was doing differentiation, or integration, I wasn't integrating outside of school. Whereas with the studying and the uni side of what you're doing, you will constantly be going towards that theory. And that's the beauty of an apprenticeship, the ability to have both sides and have both benefits from both sides.
Yeah, definitely. I can add on to that again. Uni and study side directly applicable to what you're doing. With what I'm studying towards, I have 3 exams to study towards. It will be every 6 months that I do an exam. And every single aspect of what I'm studying towards is directly applicable to what I'll be doing in the real working world. So as I'm going through my time as an apprentice, I'm gaining more knowledge that's relevant to the role. Again, another huge advantage that has over going to university where, some modules might not be directly applicable. I'd say it depends on how efficient you are with your time. One thing I'd say with the uni and study side is that as opposed to A levels and GCSE, it demands that you're extremely effective with your time. You can't procrastinate, otherwise you'll get swallowed up by the study work. It's definitely not easier. It might be just as hard as the real world work, or there'll be times where you might have to step back from responsibility in work to focus on coursework or exams it might have coming up outside of work. So that's just my 2 pence on that. And we've got a question.
Question to the assessment center notes people look overboard. That was provided to me, but that is a very good one, and it's like one of it. It's like again, it's those little things that you do that just push you ahead. I definitely recommend you do that, and don't ever think that like looking good means you're going to be overboard, or like for example like showing a bit of personality is overboard. Like you're like do not fear of like jumping out of line a bit. I'm not saying like be completely rebellious and defiant as I mentioned previously, but those little things do help. So yeah, definitely recommend you do so.
Yep, definitely. I can completely echo that. I've got a question here, follow-up question. Can you give tips on cover letters? Very whistle-stop tour of how your cover letter should be structured. You got to remember that it is a letter. So, I mean, at least you want to make sure that, format, keep it to one page. The way I structure my cover letters, well, I think I might be cutting out a little bit. Not sure if you can hear me quite well.
No, you're
Am I
good now.
cutting out? Yeah, yeah, am I
Yeah,
good?
you're good. No, you're
Good.
good. You're good.
The way I structure my cover letters is I do quick one page, I do a brief intro, introducing myself. You have the dear hiring manager, or dear, or whatever the equivalent of that is. Introduce yourself. You tell them about what you're doing. I'm currently a year 13 student studying towards, sorry about the background noise, by the way, studying towards, your A levels. You express your interest in a role, and then I do a paragraph on why the company, a paragraph on why the role, and I do a paragraph on why myself as a candidate. Very succinct structure. You keep that to one page. In your wider company, you might want to reference, a few values, maybe some real work news, wider role. You might want to look at the job description, pull stuff from there and relate it back to your interest with the last paragraph, maybe drawing 2 or 3 prior experiences, or just something that shows that you have the transferable skills that make you suitable for the role. And with that, you should be able to get through to the next stage on a cover letter basis.
Yeah, so we've got 2 more questions. I think we'll quickly whiz through them because it's been 90 minutes now. Uh, Hi, I'm applying to a few apprenticeships whilst I start university. What are your opinions on this? You've already started uni, so I can't tell you like go back in time and not start uni. Apply. I'd say definitely apply. You're not necessarily losing anything. It doesn't cost you anything. And if you are truly passionate, I feel like you're more than capable of getting an offer and just rescinding like the rest of your uni years. There's not much I can really tell you now that you've already started or I think you're about to start, other than apply. I think you're not really losing anything out of it. And either way, you've got university, so you've got that level of higher education and you can go on and do your graduate routes. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd say just to add on to that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people have applied during university. It's just that are you willing to, miss out on getting spring weeks and summers for the first year because you're focused on apprenticeships? It's nearly impossible to apply to both at once, because the online assessments, the difficulty is almost the same of spring weeks and summer internships being slightly harder in the sense that they incorporate more technical questions. Apprenticeships are already as draining as they are coming from someone who's done a plethora of applications. So it's about what you really, it's the opportunity cost essentially. Are you willing to miss out on the spring weeks for applications? They say your first year doesn't matter too much, but of course you still want to try to stay on top of it just in case, you end up, God forbid, you don't get an apprenticeship and your first year, you haven't gone to much lectures. You need to still be in a position where you can get a good predicted grade for your uni course. So that's just my advice on that.
Yeah. Would you recommend emailing recruiting teams to understand more about the job description and deadlines as they haven't released opening dates? Companies that haven't released opening dates haven't done so because they don't have one, not because they're gatekeeping it. So often emailing them won't really get you the date. You literally just have to keep checking on a weekly or a daily basis until they do release. I'd recommend you go towards our first webinar series where we went through trackers and how to stay on top of applications, because that shows you where you can be updated on the status of apprenticeships and even graduate roles. So I definitely say in terms of starting dates, don't really press them too much on that because they probably just won't have it. When they do have it, they just publish it. So if you do find it, then yeah, it's been published. In regards to, I'm going to really quickly just check that. To understand more about the job description, if it's not enough for you, I'd recommend doing so. It shows that initiative, it shows your willingness to learn, willingness to know more about the company and the role. I didn't necessarily do it myself just because I don't think it was necessary. But there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't go to the recruiting emails.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't hurt to ask, but it tells of if you don't understand much about the job description or there's not enough sufficient information there. Just a little piece of advice. Remember, you've got current apprentices there who have done the exact application cycle last year. You can always just reach out to them and ask them, or even send them what's on the website. They'll be able to explain to you in more depth, okay, this is what you're doing, this is what's required, this is what you want to do, and X, Y, Z. So if you're ever unsure, just reach out to current apprentices if anything. You have just a quick question coming again. Are any of you doing a tech apprenticeship? No, but we do have a member who is doing a software engineering apprentice. I can put
Yeah.
you through to them if you do message me on LinkedIn. It will be up on the Apprentice Room TikTok, our LinkedIn's and socials. So feel free to follow, feel free to message me again. Just remind me.
Thank you all very much. Massive thank you to absolutely everyone who's joined, everyone who's stayed for nearly 95 minutes now on your lovely summer holiday evening. I wish absolutely all of you guys the best for your apprenticeships, and there's going to be so much more content coming. I feel like I've said this a few times, but I really want to emphasize the apprentice room is a lot planned, just as I discussed previously. For example, mock assessment centers. It's these really creative ideas that we're looking to working towards and providing to you guys to make sure that the 2025-2026 application season is as convenient and as informed for you guys as possible. Me and Joel are constantly working on new ideas. And also, our DMs and emails are open. We're always responding to questions. And hands down, the number one question we get is the recording available? Yes, it is. It's on YouTube. Just search up The Apprentice Room and you will find it. It should be uploaded in the next hour or two. Obviously, it's now 95 minutes long, so it takes a while to upload, but that should be available very, very quickly. Please do go back and check all of our previous webinars as well. And I'm sure Joel's got something to say before we end the webinar.
Yeah, huge thank you to everyone for joining. It's been a pleasure hosting this series. Of course, we've got more to come in the near future, so stay tuned and do follow our TikTok because that is where we do post or will be posting the most frequently. Of course, there's our LinkedIn as well, which oh, not sure if I cut out there. Yep. I think I'm back now. Yeah, there will be our LinkedIn where we do post. There will be our TikTok where we post. But again, it's been a huge pleasure hosting the series. It's been lovely to have familiar faces join in on consecutive webinars. And obviously, again, I wish you the best this upcoming application season. Of course, if there's any other questions that you have, to message the Apprentice Room. You can email us, but that we do respond infrequently. You can also reach out to our personal TikToks or LinkedIn, or some people might have me on WhatsApp already. You can just drop me a message and we'll be sure to try to get back to that as fast as possible. But again, appreciate everyone joining and hopefully you'll follow our socials and keep you updated from there.
Thank you very much, guys. I think we'll call it an evening. Appreciate it, Joel. And thank you to absolutely everyone who's joined. Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, have a good evening, guys.
See ya.